Zelensky is ready to quit his own job if that brings peace and an end to the war. Well, now there's some caveats with that, so it may not be quite as it may appear at the surface. But before we get into that, even there's some breaking news coming out of the White House just a few minutes ago. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, made an appearance in Washington right now. He went to the White House and is a really unusual meeting at the front because instead of President Trump himself meeting to lots of fanfare like we often get, we had just the White House chief of protocol, Monica Crowley. You might not even know who that is. Not quite the way you would expect, one of the senior members of European royalty, so to speak, with the president of France and how it's ordinarily done. And Trump's not even there. And they're really to no fanfare at all. It's almost like just someone met him and said, yeah, here, follow me, go this way. So that's probably not an accident. That's probably not an omission. And there's going to be a press conference come out later today where the two of them are supposed to meet, and it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. We're going to have a show this afternoon, actually, after they come out at 3:30 p.m. Washington, D.C. time. We've got a lot of things we're going to discuss at that show as well, and we'll have that for you, but a little interesting in the way it starts. But before we get to that one, we have some issues to discuss here. Because if this could bring a war to an end, Zelensky saying he's ready to quit if it brings peace, but only if it means he gets into NATO. Here's actually Zelensky's comments that he made.
України, якщо вам дуже потрібно, щоб я залишив свій пост, я готовий. Друга історія, можу поміняти це на НАТО. Якщо є такі умови, одразу, щоб довго про це не говорити. Я фокусуюсь на безпеці України сьогодні, а не за 20 років. І не збираюсь бути у влади десятиріччя. Тому це...
Well, we'll see about that because there's been a number of people talking very seriously about NATO. And if Zelensky's trying to say, sure, I'll quit if it means getting into NATO, I think he's trying to play Trump. I think he's trying to say, hey, look, I'm willing to step aside. I'm willing to be the bigger man here, but only if it means here. As though he has leverage, negotiating leverage. We're going to see how that is a recurring theme, which I think is always bankrupt because there is no such leverage with President Trump. And there was some additional information and signs coming out of the White House before this, which could perhaps have prompted Zelensky to make this seemingly alarming offer. He's never even suggested this before. This is very new that he would even put that on the table. But it could be because of some statements that have come out of the White House both yesterday and today. First of all, Carolyn Leavitt, the spokesperson for the White House, was talking about the potential for a negotiated settlement and had this very interesting timeline at the end.
He believes very strongly that Russia is willing to make a deal. And he's fighting to make a deal. And Mike Waltz, as you just saw him go inside, is going to be working around the clock all weekend to get a deal and end this conflict in Ukraine. The president said he wants the killing to stop. He wants to stop seeing innocent men die. Now the president and his team are very much focused on continuing negotiations with both sides of this war to end the conflict. And the president is very confident we can get it done this week.
Okay, that was quite an alarming statement that I was surprised that didn't get more notice yesterday because she says, yeah, we think we can get this done in the coming week, like within this next coming 7 days. And it's interesting in there. And the reason why I said I wonder if this could have been what sparked Zelensky to make his statement, because she said there and specified, we're talking with both sides of this issue. We're talking with Russia and we're talking with the Ukraine side. And so if they're telling them, listen, we're about ready to wrap this up. And I can assure you it's not going to include an offer for NATO in Ukraine by the Trump administration. So maybe Zelensky's trying to play this by saying, well, I'll even take this extraordinary step right here as long as it gets something that I want. And I truly don't understand his thinking, Zelensky, because everybody, you had Secretary of Defense Hegseth when he went to Europe a week or so ago. One of the big headlines that he came out with, when he put up front, bold, no caveats at all, that Ukraine is not going to get NATO. He said he thinks it is a very unrealistic scenario for NATO to ever join in, along with a number of other things. But that was one of the key ones there. The only thing that was, some said later in the week that it was walked back when Hegseth said, well, I'm not going to take anything off the table. I'm not going to say anything that's going to prejudge what the president is going to do. He's going to make his own call. Trump himself had already previously said there's not going to be any NATO. And he goes, look, that's what started the war in the first place, which we have said on this show from the beginning. He said that if Russia would find that unpalatable, as would we, and so he said, I understand that was part of what drove Russia to do this, and that's why he said that Biden had a chance to have this war off the table, could have prevented it from coming at all. He didn't take any of those. That's one of the things he meant, because Biden, NATO, and France and UK and all kinds of people continued to say NATO was on the table. But it never was, not really. But you hear, if Zelensky keeps hearing that, he's going to keep going down that path. Well, now since Trump has been inaugurated, of course, he said nothing besides that yes, this is off the table. And if that was any question about that, and about also this morning, we had the National Security Adviser Waltz also echo what Caroline Leavitt said the day before about.
We expect to get this deal done. President Trump expects to get this deal done. And I think you will see that in very short order.
And at that same conference there, in the press conference, he said that getting into NATO is probably not going to happen. In fact, Fox News, in relation to what Zelensky had suggested about saying he'd willing to quit for NATO, he was asked on Fox News this morning, is that something on the table?
Is that back on the table? Because he was asked that question and he said that he would be willing to step down.
That is not back on the table. I do not see the United States having Ukraine enter into NATO and then having United States troops essentially obligated immediately in terms of Article 5 or coming to have U.S. troops coming directly in for the defense of Ukraine.
So if anyone's confused, that they can't be, first of all, because you see there, Waltz doesn't just say it's off the table. He tells you why. What possible motivation would any American have, would the president of the United States have, to put NATO on the table and say, yes, I'm potentially willing to have an Article 5 guarantee that's going to tie American troops to the defense of Ukraine when they have a war with Russia that they're going to lose. And the only way that you can forestall that, theoretically, is to have, foreign ground troops go in and start fighting conventionally. It's not really, because if foreign troops did come in, and any possibility of Russia being driven out would immediately be checked with nuclear weapons. So it's not even though it's a theoretical possibility, it's more hypothetical because it would never happen. So that would be the height of foolish and stupidity, which Trump is not going to do. And he is signaling in every way, himself, his senior leaders, everyone is saying the same thing. So why then do you still have Zelensky floating this trial balloon to say, well, I'll step down if that's what it takes? Look, you should just step down, period, with no conditions or anything else. The thing that would make the most sense, that would be the wisest course of action for Zelensky, is to just step down, to just say, I've done the best I could for all these years. I've gone past. I'm going to pass the torch off to somebody else. I'm going to, the Constitution has, whoever it is, there are provisions. If the president steps down, someone else will step up. They'll be convened, and now then they'll be legitimately, according to the Constitution, someone who can actually sign a deal, because we've already shown you that the Russians have emphatically said they are not going to sign any kind of a deal with Zelensky, because they view him as an illegitimate leader, because he went past his term of service and there's not even an election on the table. You've seen Trump himself say there needs to be an election. There needs to be an election. We need to do some things about, these mineral deals we keep hearing more and more about. And by the way, speaking of the mineral deals, that's another thing that's kind of a point of contention. Again, on Fox News this morning, National Security Adviser Waltz was asked, hey, about these nuclear or these mineral deals, isn't that just taking a bunch of stuff from Ukraine?
If their refineries were fully capable, if we had that outside investment, for U.S. imports for an entire year. There's enough gallium, there's enough tritium, there's titanium, one of the largest titanium reserves in all of Europe. But that will take investment to get it to full capacity. So, our position has been, look, 50% of something that is much larger, growing the pie, is better than the 100% of where they are today. So let's grow together in an economic partnership. And of course, the U.S. would protect our assets for which we are invested in. This could mean trillions, not only for the Ukrainian people, but for us and for stability for the region. And that economic investment is one of the best security guarantees that Ukraine could hope for.
It's so ironic because the claim, anyway, is that there are somewhere around $2 and $3 trillion worth of raw materials underneath the whole of Ukraine that could be exploited and could be mined and provided economic benefit for both Ukraine and whoever is helping them to do this. And the United States is coming in saying that Trump has come in specifically and said he's looking for $500 million worth. So $500 million of this alleged $3 trillion total. And again, this is all theoretical stuff. It hasn't been done before, and it would take an enormous amount of investment to get done, to even start to having any kind of actual return on investment. It would be years before any kind of a profit would be seen. But instead of saying, okay, you know what, if that's going to get the United States in, maybe I should just, talking about Zelensky here, maybe he should just go ahead and make this deal if that's going to get him something beneficial. Now, one of the things that he's been saying, Zelensky has, is that, well, you're actually basically saying that you want this mineral wealth to be sort of like a payback for what we got in the past. And what he's been saying recently, and you're going to see this in a second, he's like saying, look, we can't go back and do this stuff before. This stuff wasn't a loan before. But let me show you a clip, a very short clip from 2023, where Zelensky seems to say that's fine.
If you can't give us some financial support, okay, please give us a credit and we will give you back money.
Okay, he'll give us back money then. He said that's the fine. So now then Trump, who's now the president of the United States, is going, sounds good to me. How about we go and do that? Now, this is, to be clear, at least the way it's being promoted so far, this is not Trump saying, all right, we're going to send in American companies here. They're going to take all this wealth and bring it back to the United States. It's a cooperation agreement, which I think you saw the Waltz there talk about. Yeah, this is stuff that's going to provide money for Ukraine too. Because, I mean, the people who are going to be operating this equipment, who are going to be doing the mining, et cetera, those are Ukraine. So people, their economy would gain from this. You can't even start doing any of this extraction unless there's first peace, i.e. the war has ended and the dying on the Ukraine side has stopped, so that they can start rebuilding their country. And this would provide a lot of leverage. Now, there's a lot to be decided about, who would get what percentage of the profits, et cetera. And there needs to be some tough negotiation there. And Ukraine has every right to press for a hard deal to not give up too much of the rewards. But no matter how that part is done here, Ukraine and their people will benefit from it. But now then, instead of saying $500 billion, you have Zelensky going, yeah, that's a little too much for me.
Я знаю, що у нас було 100. І це факт. Я не збираюсь визнавати 500. Хто б що не говорив, як би ми не спілкувались. При всій повазі, ще раз, при всій повазі до партнерів, але, я стійко стою, тому що це правдива ситуація. Абсолютно ми праві. І друга ситуація, якщо чесно, навіть 100 мільярдів я не готовий фіксувати. Поясню чому. Тому що ми не маємо визнавати гранти як борги. Подобається це чи не подобається? Я домовлявся з Байденом і домовлявся з Конгресом Сполучених Штатів Америки. Я вдячен Конгресу. Це була присутність двох партій.
Okay, first of all, let's be clear. He didn't negotiate anything with the United States Congress. He didn't negotiate anything with the Biden administration. They took whatever actions they wanted to take based on the interests of the United States and whatever preference the Biden had. You didn't negotiate anything. If Biden ended up giving that stuff away for and asking nothing in return, That's up to him. And I can't speak on that because I don't know all the terms and the details that were done in there. But here's the fact. The guy who's currently sitting on top of the United States government says for us to continue to give you anything and to get any kind of a deal that you need. And by the way, Ukraine cannot survive on the battlefield without American support. Zelensky himself has absolutely vocally agreed to that. I think it was less than 2 weeks ago. I think we even had one of the sound bites on this channel here where he admitted we can't survive without the United States. So you recognize that. And if you didn't say it out loud, it doesn't matter because it's true. And now then you're talking to the guy who has in his hand the capacity to either get you a deal that you can live with, that you want to, or he can take his hand away and say, cool, you're on your own then. You don't want my deal? That's fine. So why is Zelensky trying to play with fire by telling that one person, not the West, not NATO, but the one guy, Trump, who has the ultimate decision-making power? He can choose what he's going to do to support Ukraine or not. Because you realize that this is, look, Trump had sent, following the show we did a week or so ago where Zelensky himself advocated and said, yes, let's do a deal. You remember that one? He kept saying that over. Let's do a deal with Trump for these minerals. Then Trump sends over his Treasury Secretary Bissett and says, okay, here's the deal. We're going to do a deal for $500 billion of this alleged $3 trillion total endowment that's going to, some percentage of which would come to the United States. And then he's going, yeah, about that. I'm not going to do this. So he sent Bissett home, and according to reports I read this morning, Zelensky was screaming at Bissett, and he was really angry. Maybe he didn't realize what the number was when he said, let's do a deal. Maybe he's thinking like 50 billion. And he's saying now, that clip I just showed you there, maybe not even 100. But he definitely wasn't thinking 500, and so he sent Bissett home, wasn't willing to sign any of that. So that made Trump mad. I mean, Trump was insulted because that's his designated representative of the United States government that went there to what he thought was sign a deal that had been agreed to, that Zelensky himself had suggested. Instead, he sends him back empty-handed. It's like Zelensky is trying to play hardball with Trump. And he is making an attempt, but I can't for the life of me understand what kind of rational thought could be going on in his mind that he's playing with fire here, that he genuinely apparently thinks that he can compel Trump to his deal as though he has some leverage. And let me just, if there's anyone watching this that is unclear on this point, let me eliminate that confusion. Zelensky has no leverage at all for anyone. He doesn't have it with NATO. He doesn't have it with Macron. He doesn't have it with Schultz of Germany, with Keir Starmer, and he certainly doesn't have it with Vladimir Putin. He has no leverage, and least of all with Donald Trump, who's no Americans are involved with this. Our national security is not tied to this. It's not. It's not. In fact, our national security is tied to getting the war over with as soon as possible so that we can get on to things that are of vital national interest to the United States, like engaging with Russia on strategic nuclear arms reduction treaties. The New START, which will expire 12 months from now in later in 2026 or early in 2026. Those things take a lot of work. You got to start working now to get those things done. And so Trump wants to get this stuff off the table. So there's no leverage for you to tell Trump that, no, I might be willing to do 100, not willing to do 500. He just took it off the table. And look, he's given Trump every incentive in the world to go, okay, you don't want 500? Then you can figure this out on your own. You want to sell that to the Europeans? You want to, do whatever you want to do with them and let them provide help? Ours is done. He may do something that Doug McGregor has suggested on this channel. He may say, I'm taking all of our guys. We're bringing everybody we have out of there. All the intelligence support will stop, all the targeting information, all the training, anything that we're doing, special forces stuff, all the things on the ground that we've been doing, bring it all home. And you can either figure it out with Russia yourself. You can figure it out with Europe, however you want to do it. I'm pretty sure that that's on the table with Macron today. I'm sure that Trump will be talking about those scenarios. But Zelensky is just playing with his own life when he's talking about trying to make these deals and trying to press the other side, the U.S. side, when he has no leverage to do so. We'll see how that works out here. But Trump has recently said, and we showed this on this channel late last week, that he recognizes Zelensky has no cards. He has nothing to do, and in order to put pressure on him. And of Zelensky on the 19th of this month, Trump unloaded this description of his partner.
Think of it, a modestly successful comedian. President Zelensky talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won. He refuses to have elections, is low in the real Ukrainian polls. Somebody said, oh, no, his polls are good. Give me a break. The only thing he was really good at was playing Joe Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job.
What? How much more clear could it be? I mean, Trump is telling him straight up there, look, there's not going to be any NATO. There are going to be elections in Ukraine. And if you want this thing to come to an end, you better start playing nice with me. Don't play hardball with me. Trump says you might not even have a country if you don't. That's pretty clear that he's thinking along the terms I just mentioned here, that he is contemplating cutting Zelensky loose and handing it over to Macron, Keir Starmer, Schultz, whoever wants to. And apparently Schultz isn't going to be in the picture much longer, as it's going to be over the elections over the weekend. We'll talk about that later in the week as well. So even that could be changing. But I assure you, the new guy coming in, Merz, I think his name is not going to be wanting to go to war with Russia for anybody. He's not going to be willing to risk German troops, I doubt very seriously. We'll see what he says once that's actually completely ironed out and there's a new chancellor in Germany. But the bottom line is this war is over, and it's coming close now. And it's going to end either really ugly because the United States withdraws because of this really bad play by Zelensky, or they're going to have some kind of a negotiated settlement that is only ugly and is not catastrophic. Those are the only two options you have now. There was plenty of chances earlier. As a matter of fact, we've talked a lot about one of the biggest chances that ever existed was in March and April of 2022 at Istanbul, when everything was on the table to get this war over quickly. The Ukraine still had Mariupol at that point, much less Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and all the places that have been taken in the years since, and the hundreds of thousands of people, the Ukraine who have been killed in this pointless war. All that could have been saved there. One of the reasons why that was sunk, Zelensky himself is the one that had the ultimate authority because he decided whether to take the deal or to not take the deal. But he was strongly encouraged by a European leader at the time, Prime Minister of the Great Britain, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson today was in Kiev, and he is not at all on board with Trump's deal. And one wonders, is he going to try to sabotage this deal by, again, putting a word in Zelensky's ear and encouraging him to go forward? Here's what he said.
Not a penny can flow from this investment fund that is going to be set up unless you have a free, sovereign, and secure Ukraine. And don't forget, a sovereign country is a great, great thing. A sovereign country can decide which clubs it wants to join, like NATO. A sovereign country can decide which troops it wants to invite onto its soil to help protect it. And that, to answer your question, Susanna, about my advice to Keir Starmer and the UK, now is the moment for us to step up and do what I think that Trump wants Europe to do, and that is show how we have a plan to help secure Ukraine. And that's going to mean, I believe, UK troops are going to mean French troops, troops from other European countries. They won't be there in a war-fighting role, but they'll be there to provide a sense of security and reassurance to the Ukrainians in the context of that peace deal.
This guy has lost his mind. If he had it, I don't know. Maybe it's just a continuation of the fact that he didn't have a strategic thinking mind when he was prime minister. To sit there and say with a straight face and with conviction that British and French troops, among others in NATO, are going to patrol some kind of a ceasefire, some kind of an end to deal war resolution, like that they want to give security to Ukraine. What is he talking about? There's not going to be any foreign troops patrolling any kind of settlement inside of Ukraine. That's what Russia went to war to stop. They are not going to allow NATO troops under whatever name to be on the ground on their border in what's left of Ukraine. They have categorically rejected that. Nobody on the Russian side has equivocated. They are point blank, flat out, this will not happen. Now, hours ago, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, went on the RIA Novosti channel in Russia and on their media and just said, here are the conditions that we will have to end the war. We will not have a ceasefire. There will be no pause in the fighting. We will continue on until an end of war declaration has been reached that we agree with, that's on our terms. What that tells you unequivocally is that Russia has dedicated that they will have everything that they want. And I've shown you Ryabkov. A number of other people have said the June 15th lines of 2024 are the minimum they'll take, which is all the administrative borders of the 4 oblasts plus denazification as they define it and demilitarization as they're achieving on the battlefield. Yeah, this is what he said right here. Lavrov's actual comment was the president clearly said that we are ready to negotiate with Ukraine and with Europe, with any representatives who in good faith would like to help achieve peace. But we will stop hostilities only when these negotiations give a firm, stable result that suits the Russian Federation. Of course, the realities on the ground must be taken into account. And that's Russian signals for the June 15th lines at a minimum. And I think I've told you several times before that there's a lot of conflict within the Russian side. A lot of hardliners would consider the June 14th lines to be a loss for Russia. And they are putting apparently lots of pressure on Putin to not even settle for not try to get a negotiated settlement, but continue to go on to minimum of the Dnieper River and possibly into more what's known as Novorossiya, what they call sections of Ukraine, but go beyond the Dnieper River, especially in the south, north of Odessa, which they also think are Russian, or they say are Russian-speaking and ethnic people, that they want the lines to be there. So what you're seeing Lavrov's signal right now is that militarily, they're going to continue on in that direction right there, and they will only stop if negotiations can cause them to do so. And while Putin's under a lot of pressure, he is still pushing back on having a negotiated settlement. It's possible, if the Trump administration presses for it right now, that they could get only the June 14 line. So that would mean Ukraine would have to withdraw its forces from areas where it currently controls on those 4 oblasts. That would be horrible. It would be embarrassing. It would be shameful, but it would also keep them alive, because if they don't, I keep saying this over and over, I'm hoping someday somebody's going to listen. Otherwise, Russia will conquer much more territory than the 15 June lines. They will. You got to understand that the morale on the lines, it's not talked about in the West much, but is in a dramatic reversal of what it had been for a long time. Right now, the Ukraine soldiers know that the war is over. They see what Trump is saying. They see how this is going. They see how the European Union can't do anything. They know firsthand how the war is actually going on the front line. They know it can't be won. They know they can't even stop Russia. It's just a matter of how fast they're going to continue to go forward. Meanwhile, the Russians know they will win. They see the same things. And so the morale is just going through the roof on the Russian side and going through the cellar on the Ukraine side. Those are the truths. And under those conditions, you can't assume that the Ukraine army will continue to put up this fierce resistance that it has that caused Russia to go slowly forward, and that at some point they may just break. Because just imagine yourself in their shoes. Why would you want to say, yes, I'm going to continue to sacrifice my life and all of my fellows here for a war that's already over? And we're just fighting now over where's the final line going to be. Is it going to be here? Or is it going to be there? All the deaths that have happened up to this point, probably over 1 million, probably another 1.5 million, 2 million casualties on top of that. Tens of thousands, scores of thousands of amputees, people that are going to need service for the rest of their life. What was all that for? You got to see these questions are already starting to happen. They may not be reported in the West, but I assure you they're going on behind the scenes and in the minds of the Ukrainian fighters, and they're getting more and more angry at their government and their Zelensky, because they have to say, why are you continuing to play hardball with Trump that only gets more of us killed and doesn't change the outcome? Those are hard questions that have to be asked, and we can't change, dismiss the possibility that the Ukraine side themselves could turn against Zelensky. Okay? I mean, we don't even think about it in the West. Everybody, like Boris Johnson, just thinks never happen. It'll never happen. They'll just keep fighting and dying every day. Of course, you got the likes of Lindsey Graham, who cheerlead that stuff on. Yeah, lower the age down to 18. Whatever you got to do, just keep throwing guys into that and keep on fighting so we get our money. He said that. I don't want to go back over that part. But you see the point being that so many of these so-called elite in the West are trying to just encourage Ukraine to keep on fighting, oblivious to the cost to Ukraine and oblivious to the fact that they can't keep doing this forever. There almost inevitably will come a day when that armed force will collapse. And then you're going to have a real problem on your hands, because now it's not going to be a negotiated settlement. It's just going to be a military victory for the Russian side, and they'll simply issue surrender terms. Don't ignore that that's a possibility. They don't like to talk about it in the West. You probably won't hear it on any other channel besides this one right here. But I'm telling you, we're playing with fire, and that means the West writ large is playing with fire that will never happen. Maybe it won't. I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know how things are going to happen. And we saw in World War II how the French and the British forces collapsed after about 2 weeks of fighting against the Nazis in May 1940. Something nobody ever thought would happen. And then yet here in this war, I thought it might have happened last summer, but it didn't. And so the Ukraine side continues to fight on fiercely, because you can't tell. It's not a science. It's an art, and no one knows until it actually happens, or if it's going to happen. So it's possible that Ukraine could keep fighting and dying until Russia wins on the battlefield what it wants, or they could be like their French and British predecessors and just collapse at some point. We just don't know. But you are playing with fire if you think that it's never going to happen. That's one thing we're going to keep an eye on here. And one of the last things I want to show you here is that Boris Johnson and apparently Keir Starmer and apparently Emmanuel Macron, they're not really dealing with reality on the ground, but at least President Trump and his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, seem to be.
Russia apparently is planning to declare victory tomorrow. There are propagandists who say they're going to share messages that the West essentially abandoned Ukraine. I mean, how does the U.S. and will it counter that messaging if that's a victory lap Russia tries to take?
Well, Vladimir Putin can attempt to take all the victory laps he wants. The reality is the president is focused on one thing and one thing only, and that's stopping the killing and the destruction across Ukraine and ensuring an enduring peace. So both sides are going to make a lot of claims, and the president has very directly engaged both sides in real time. There's bilateral negotiations with Russia, which, by the way, no one else has been able to do. Joe Biden was never able to bring Russia to the table for actual peace talks. Only Donald Trump. He's the only man in the world that would be able to do that. He's also engaging directly with Ukraine. There's going to be bumps in the road in these conversations when you're seeking a historic peace. And ultimately, our role is to do just that, and President Trump is doing that.
And so you see that they didn't even try to say, oh, well, no, there's not going to be a victory. You say they can say whatever they want to say, because this is something that we've been saying on this channel a lot. It doesn't matter what we want to do. Russia is going to say whatever they're going to say, and the West will say whatever they want, and the Ukraine side will say whatever they want. They'll put whatever kind of good face on it, but what no one can change is the reality on the ground. And President Trump seems focused on the reality on the ground, and that's why you see Pete Hegseth saying, pay attention to what the standards are that he set there. He didn't say that Ukraine's going to win. He didn't say that Ukraine's going to get an outcome they like. He said it's going to stop the killing and put into position an enduring possible for peace. Those are attainable objectives. The first time from the United States government we've heard since this war started. All this other kind of stuff, which we'll talk about today, by the way. We're going to do it at 3:30 this afternoon. We're going to talk about whatever comes out of the Trump-Macron meeting, but we're also going to look at some of the real risk that basically NATO has crippled itself because of how we've done this war. It's just shocking what we've done. And not many people are paying attention to that right now because they're still looking at the 3-year mark of the war. They're looking at how this may end. They just haven't stopped to think that already, in my view, is past tense. We have suffered a crippling failure and a loss. And I'm going to detail some of that for you this afternoon. But listen, it's important to understand that Trump is not trying to get the unattainable done here like all of the West and Biden did before him. He can get the war over, he can stop the killing, and he can have an enduring peace because, unlike what also everybody has said up to the time Trump came in office, that Russia is trying to recreate the Soviet Union. They're trying to, they're going to come for the rest of the West after they get Ukraine, all this stuff. It's never been true. It's not true now. Russia doesn't want to do that. They would only continue the war if they're forced to do so. But if they're not forced to do so and they get a negotiated settlement, the war can end now because they want security on their border. And if they can get it through negotiations, then the whole war can come to an end and the threat of more, i.e., an enduring peace. That is attainable and it's possible, though even that's not guaranteed. So we still have to play our cards very, very wisely. We don't have a lot of big cards, as Trump said last week, but we do have some. And if we play them well, we can achieve those goals right there. That should be the number one overriding drive for the United States. And it appears to be President Trump's focus because his focus is beyond the war. The START treaty I mentioned a minute ago, the nuclear arms reduction treaty, that's going to expire. That's not in America's interest to do so. Our interests are way beyond the Russia-Ukraine conflict that's been going on the ground here. Ours are much more enduring and going forward. And that centers on keeping nuclear reduction treaties on the table and active and continuing on whatever's going to happen when this one expires. And Trump is also talking about adding China into this. Those are highly attainable objectives and highly desirable outcomes, something we should go. They're going to be hard. It's going to be real hard to get China looped into that, but it's worth trying because the cost to mankind, if nuclear deterrence by any player ever fails, it's going to be catastrophic for us all. So that's where President Trump needs to put his focus, and apparently that's exactly what he's doing. And Volodymyr Zelensky needs to get on board and recognizing it's not about him. President Trump is not focused on what's good for Zelensky. He's focused on what's good for America and, ironically, what's good for the people in Ukraine who are still alive. That's the truth of it. Well, listen, we appreciate you being with us today. We're going to bring you whatever news that comes out of the White House later on with Macron, and then we'll cover this issue here of Ukraine war has basically crippled NATO and how we can maybe end some of that the cost that it's already imposed on us and start the process of rebuilding so that we can ensure our own security in the future. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.